Hey, welcome back. I'm Dr. Bob Cargill, the excavator, and the Mount Ebal Balagan is the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to archaeological content and what not to do when it comes to archaeology, Israel, all of the things that we try to teach our students not to do when it comes to biblical archaeology. This Associates for Biblical Research and Gershon Galil and Scott Stripling and this whole matter, it just keeps revealing itself as exactly what we said it was. It's one of those things where you don't want to say, I told you so, but in a very unfortunate way, it is what we said it was going to be. Now, I've made 4 videos. This will be number 5, and it's just turning into exactly what we said it was going to be. Case in point, Nir Hasson, a very good journalist working in Israel, wrote for Haaretz that the Mount Ebal team, the Associates for Biblical Research and Scott Stripling and one of their partners working with them, who's involved in this, took some more of the dirt. They actually convinced the civil authority for Judea and Samaria. This is the group, and we've discussed this in the past, that archaeological sites in the West Bank that aren't official Israel Antiquities Authority sites, IAA sites, that are supposedly they supposedly belong to the Palestinian people. But because of the security arrangements that are in Israel, the civil administration for what they call Judea and Samaria, this is the West Bank, right? The southern part and the northern part, Samaria and Judea. The army basically is in control of this. And if you can convince the civil administrator to let you do things, they let you do things. And this group of political activists, these would be right-wing Israeli political activists, settlers, right, who live in settlements in the West Bank, they convinced the civil administrator, the army, to let them take more of this dirt from this dump pile on Mount Ebal. This is dirt that Adam Zertal excavated 40 years ago. It's just been sitting there in the open. So who knows how contaminated it is. They've already been digging through it and sifting through it again. This is the same dump pile that this hunk of lead that Professor Galil, his imagination sees these letters in some scans that were taken, and they announced this. It's the whole Mount of all nonsense, right? They've taken more of this dirt, and they've actually taken it back to a settlement there in the West Bank, Shavei Shomron. So they're actually transporting this dirt to the northwest of Mount Ebal so that they can sift it some more. So some people say, who cares? They're just taking this dirt from Mount Ebal, this fill, it's backfill, right? They took it and they excavated it, they dumped it. But what they're going to do with it is they're going to sift it. Nir Hasson, I'm going to read the article here. Nir Hasson reports that they were actually putting up signs. This is the Shomrim al Netzach, the Keepers of Eternity. This is a political action group saying, let's make history. It's a project that's basically saying, who knows, maybe we can find some more amulets. We said in an earlier video, I don't know, this first one, the second one, we began to hint at, not only is this a nonsensical claim, not only are there no letters on this amulet they're reading in this scans, but we hinted at the idea that what this actually is an attempt to annex the Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim region from the Palestinian people for Israel. There's something else going on here as well, and that is, this is a PR campaign in an effort to essentially annex one of the most sacred mountains in the West Bank for Israel, this altar of Joshua altar on Mount Ebal. Now, there was an excavation that was carried out there years ago, but this mountain and Mount Gerizim are in the West Bank. But there are people, Israeli individuals, Jewish individuals living in the West Bank who would like to see this not be the case. They would like to see Israel at least come in and annex some of these sites, like the so-called altar of Joshua. And again, in the first video, we discussed this. This is not the altar of Joshua. I mean, there's claims to it, but it's just not. And that's why the Israel Antiquities Authority has not deemed it so. They have not made this an official IAA site, and they won't. But look what happened just this week in Sebastia, nearby. They're going to put together some money, and they're going to start reconstructing and working on this site. And that's what this, I believe, again, my opinion, I believe that's what this is about. They're trying to push support to annex this site. There's a political agenda behind it, is what I'm saying. And I think the same thing is going on here. There's a political agenda behind, at least part of what's going on here. These are real right-wing Israeli politicians, right? They don't want to see any state of Palestine. They don't believe in a two-state solution. Some of them reject the idea of a Palestinian people, right? They don't want to see any of this. And they want this all to be Israel officially. No, Palestinian National Authority, none of this. They don't want this. They don't like the idea that they live in a settlement that the UN deems illegal, right? They don't want this border. They don't want this separation. They want all of that knocked down. They want it to just be one country. And they want to turn Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. They basically want to annex it for Israel. That's the goal. That's the intended goal. And there are tour companies, these are Israelis, living in the West Bank, in these settlements, who specialize, and we're talking about Aaron Lipkin. Now, the reason I bring him up by name is that when this Mount Ebal hunk of lead was put on tour, right? They made this announcement, and then they put it on tour, right? Somehow they got it out of the country. They send it out to do some scans, and then they bring it back, and then they went on a lecture tour. So they go on tour, and this tour guide, Aaron Lipkin, who specializes in tours of the West Bank, these West Bank sites, and one of them being the altar of Joshua, right? The Mount Ebal tradition. And all of a sudden, he's giving lectures with Dr. Stripling about, the history of Mount Ebal and the importance of this. So all of a sudden he goes from tour guide to being, scholar of archaeology. But when you look deeper into it, he's got clearly a vested interest in this. Not only is he a settler living in the West Bank, in a settlement in the West Bank, but there's perhaps some economic benefit if this Mount Ebal site gets developed, if it becomes part of Israel, and then they can start to develop this region and turn it into a tourist destination. But if they could, harness this and turn it and sell tickets and somebody can make some money, but of course, where would that money go? It's a Palestinian site right now. So you can see how the economics and the politics and how archaeology is being quite literally used as a weapon. They're using this claim, on the one hand, theologically, for fundamentalism. They're making this absurd claim that, Moses wrote the Pentateuch and that look how early literacy was, and see, the Bible could have been. They're making all these fundamentalist theological claims that we've discussed in previous videos. So there's the apologetic fundamentalism side of it. But we hinted at in early videos that there's also this political side, which leads to an economic side. And that is, if they can annex this site, the IAA doesn't want any part of this, because it's not a legitimate, there's an altar there to be sure, but there's no evidence that it's Joshua's altar, none. It's not even, we talked in an earlier video, it's not even in the right spot. according to the biblical tradition, right? They're facing each other, and this altar's on the north side of the Mount Ebal. Anyways, if they can get some representative in the Knesset, in the Israeli government, to say, no, we need to really push for this site to become an official site, which is what they're trying to do, then they can annex the site, make it an official site, then they can develop and start selling tickets. And that's just going to elevate the arguments being, these fundamentalist, ridiculous arguments being made by Dr. Stripling and Dr. Galil. That's going to elevate that, I won't even say academically, just theologically. So they're trying to play one off the other. And what they want to happen is for some scholar to write an official academic critique of their article that they wrote in like Heritage Science, this fringe niche journal, online journal for the digitization and scanning of metals, right? So they published in this journal that's for the scanning of these, degrading metals. And so they did that. They published how they scan these metals. And then they went in and added all this other interpretation of this stuff that I guarantee you the guys who actually did the scanning of the metals wanted nothing to do with. But they published, and it's a peer-reviewed journal. So now they're claiming, now we published a peer-reviewed journal, and look, it's been accepted. No, it hasn't. No archaeologist in Israel that's not affiliated with ABR and Dr. Stripling and Dr. Galil, no archaeologist working in Israel accepts this. And that's why they're not talking about it. That's why they're not, you don't hear them. They're not going to get invited to SBL. They're not going to get invited to ASOR. They're not going to be conferences and scholars lining up to. The idea is that they didn't even publish this. They started off with a press conference. This has been a media campaign and a fundraising campaign since the beginning. I've said that who knows how many times. But that's where it started. It didn't start with a publication or anything academic. So all of the academics in Israel are just happy to leave it at that. Let us media people deal with it. Those of us who have masters and doctorates and are tenured at research institutions who happen to be skilled with the media, who deal with public media. All of my colleagues who have YouTube channels and Instagram accounts and Twitter and who are out there doing blogs and who know how to deal with social media, let us deal with their social media campaign. Social media versus social media. What you will not see is a legitimate scholar trying to critique this Mount Ebal inscription in any professional way. Why? For one, it's unprovenanced, and scholars have basically made a commitment not to publish anything about unprovenanced materials. When you do that, it adds legitimacy and credibility to it, and this is going to be the problem. If some scholar comes along and just blows it out of the water with a professional publication, let's say a peer-reviewed publication, what peer-reviewed publication is going to publish this thing? It's unprovenance. But let's say some scholar writes a critical review of the Mount Ebal publication, right? And just hammers it. Just all the things we've been saying in all these videos. Let's say they put that in print and make some of their own points and echo all of the points that I've been making and that Michael Press has been making and that God Barnea has been making, and all of us have been making all of these points. And let's say that some scholar echoes a lot of these points that we've heard over and over and over, the multitude of problems with the Mount Ebal inscription, and makes some points of his or her own, and publishes this. It's going to have the effect of elevating it into the academic realm. And then Scott Stripling and Gershon Galil and the ABR team are going to say, see, we just agreed to disagree about this discovery. It's going to legitimize it. Even though it's going to be completely blown out of the water in the academic refutation, that academic refutation is going to have the effect of elevating it up into the realm of something that's worth being discussed by scholars, and it's just not. And that is why no scholars are discussing this thing No archaeologists are even commenting on it in Israel. And I want to point this out in Nir Hasson's article. Archaeologist Alon Arad, this is the director of the Emek, he says that the excavation constitutes, quote, an ethical failure by the entire archaeological community, whose silence continues to provide legitimacy to such projects. I understand the argument. The argument is that all of these scholars, all of these archaeologists digging in Israel need to stand up and denounce this. I get it. The counter argument is, what have they done of a scholarly nature? Scott Stripling and Gershon Galil started this whole thing with a press conference in which they never showed any pictures of the inscription, right? They started with a press conference making all these absurd claims, right? Here we found this inscription and here's what it says. And they never showed the scans. They held on to those scans for a year and then ended up publishing it in some niche peer review online journal, right? And it's been a year. That's all they came up with. And then when we actually saw the inscriptions and what Dr. Galil was actually claiming, we just went, oh my gosh, this is worse than we thought. We thought it was going to be bad. And then when we actually saw the article, we were like, oh my gosh, this was awful. It's just his imagination. It was a Rorschach test. And so when we actually saw it, all the archaeologists said, yeah, we don't need to refute this. This is as nuts. It's as imaginary as we thought it was going to be. So instead of protesting it or refuting it, they're just going to let it evaporate into the ether. They're going to let it die in social media. They're not even going to give it the credibility or the legitimacy of an academic refutation because it does not deserve one. And that's the logic here. Let us, the scholars in social media, deal with it in social media because that's all this has ever been, a social media campaign. It's a fundraising campaign. It's a political advocacy campaign so that they can try to annex these sites. Now, if you want to repost this video and share it with your friends and get the word out that that's what they're doing, it's clear. Nir Hasson has done a good job of really trying to get the word out that this is a political movement. It's a theological movement, right? It's a fundamentalist movement. They're just trying to, say all of the archaeology that's been done in the past decades, right? Century in Israel, it's no good. That's not good archaeology because it doesn't say what the infallible, inerrant Bible says. It doesn't support that. And if it doesn't support that, it can't be good archaeology. That's their argument, theologically. But politically, what they're trying to do is say there shouldn't be two-state solution. There are no Palestinian people. They shouldn't be protected. And this site needs to be turned into a commercial site that sells tickets and that develops commercial interest for these settlers living in the West Bank. Because it's not the West Bank, it's all Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can see the argument. That's what's going on. They're trying to put pressure on the civil authority, the army, to let them develop Palestinian land. That's all this is. And so they've got Aaron Lipkin as part of their tour, right? Their lecture tour. He runs an Israeli tour company who lives there in the settlement in the West Bank. They've got Scott Stripling, who digs at these sites in the West Bank, right? Who's been leading. Look, give him credit. He's got media savvy. The day that peer review article came out in Heritage Science or whatever it was, he had already filmed and lined up on YouTube after YouTube after YouTube and press release after they were lined up. He does what any good marketing strategist would do. If you're going to release something, you're going to make an announcement, you have to have your media lined up one after another, so that story has some legs and so that it's a marketing strategy. It's a media strategy. It is not an archaeological discovery. And now he's recruiting for his archaeological excavations, right? For what he's doing, right? He's trying to recruit more people. And then with this, he's raising more money, gaining influence, and now he can put a little pressure on the local politicians who may or may not share his ideology politically, right? I said in one of these early videos that what you're seeing is the Trumpification, the Donald Trumpification of Israeli archaeology. But don't criticize the archaeologists working in Israel for not responding to it, because they're also not responding to other imaginary claims coming at. Why would you respond to an imaginary claim? It's imaginary. You don't respond to imaginary things. Let us in the social media take care of it, because that's all it is. It's a social media campaign. Anyways, that's what's happening. I hope that gives you a little bit more insight. Follow Nir Hasson and Haaretz. He's keeping a good eye on this. But man, it never ends. I thought Dr. Stripling was digging at Shiloh, but apparently they're scooping up dirt from Mount Ebal and they're taking it back to one of these settlements so that they continue this Mount Ebal work. Anyways, that's what's happening. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about this. But until then, everything the best.